Hey, and welcome to Trail Trials, the video review section of iRunFar.com. My name is Travis Lyles, and in this video, we're going to take a look at the Hoka Torrent 3. This is the third iteration of the shoe, as the name would state, and probably what's the most accessible, non-max cushion, medium-of-the-road trail running shoe that Hoka has to offer. So it's probably the most widely applicable shoe across their entire line as it relates to trail running. In this iteration, they said they've updated the grip, they've added some changes to the upper. Let's get into all that right now.
Let's jump right in and take a look at the outsole here. So one of the things that was called out in the literature was that there is an upgraded outsole here to be more sticky and be more durable. And I think in general that has happened here compared to the last one. They feel just less slick. When you're on muddy things or out here in the Pacific Northwest, a wet bridge or a rock that's kind of in a watery area, kind of like a stream crossing type of thing, I feel like these definitely have more friction than they used to on the previous version. So I think that's there. I wouldn't put it in the same kind of class as, say, the Speed Goat or the Mafate Speed. But overall, I think what's here is definitely adequate, does the job. From a lug depth standpoint, 4mm lugs, so they are fairly toothy, which I think is really great. This is the same exact patterning as Torrent 2. So nothing has changed there in terms of what this looks like. It's all pretty much the same. All the dark parts are the tread, all of the kind of lighter, let's call it sage green, if you will, type areas. That's exposed foam and midsole. You'll have that here in the middle. You have that in the back here in a couple of places. And there is no rock plate in this shoe. So unlike other versions of Hoka's, where you have a lot more thick cushioning that sort of keeps your foot up and above when there is puncture, when there is hard things, this is a shoe where you're going to feel a little more of that stuff poking through because it lacks the protection of a rock plate, but it also lacks the protection of having extra foam between you and the obstacle that might be beneath you. And then the last thing I'll call out here on the outsole here are kind of these lugs that kind of hang off in the side. And again, in the Hoka Torrent 2 review, you can see these and they broke off. Both of these are still okay. I might have seen it by now, but at this point, they seem fairly well secured. But again, the patterning's exactly the same, and it definitely could happen. I just don't see a way that without connecting all of this together to sort of keep that from happening. So I would anticipate, based on my knowledge, based off of usage, that these are eventually going to pop off. And in fact, some of them feel a little bit more sort of sturdy, if you will, than others. Okay, let's jump in here to the midsole. And Hoka's using this is a neutral midsole, and this is Pro Fly. So this is more on the rubbery side or reboundy side of the house. It's that meant to go a little bit faster. So you see the Pro Fly foam in a lot of the more advanced or faster focused Hoka shoes in their trail line as well. The carbon shoes and those types of faster road running shoes also include this same type. So that's what it's focused at. And it's really a good, I think, foam. It feels really nice. It works in a lot of conditions. It's not sloppy. It's not too squishy. It's middle size, right, of a stack height. It's more of a standard stack height of a shoe. So it just feels like it's pretty much enough to do pretty much whatever you want to do, I guess, is what it comes down to. And you'll keep hearing me sort of go back to that. This is a shoe that can do a whole lot of things. And I think the componentry that's built in here exemplifies that. And this is a foam that, while meant to go fast, also can provide good comfort over a longer duration of run. In fact, the first run that I ever did in these out of box was like a 28-mile hybrid run, road, gravel roads, dirt trail, so a little bit of mud, and it performed fine. There was never a spot where I was like, ugh, this isn't really the right shoe for the job. In fact, it felt really like it was exactly the right shoe for the job. So I think that's a really good testament to like the componentry that's here. Next up, let's take a look at the upper. And from an upper standpoint, this is another area on top of the compound used for the lugs and the tread that Hoka is updating from the version 2 to the version 3. And it's really all around this upper that's lighter mesh and is supposed to breathe better. I never really felt like that was a major kind of drawback of the previous, and I don't know that I can with full confidence say that I truly noticed that this is a more breathable shoe than, say, the last version. What I will notice here is that some of the overlays and the way that this has been updated isn't working out super great. And you can see some of that here in this connection point of where you've got this mud guard that sort of runs all the way around the shoe, and then this other kind of overlay that somewhat kind of stability, adds a little bit of structure to the upper on top of the mesh. But on both the medial and lateral sides, it's breaking down really between these two areas. Now, I don't know if it's just the shoe that I have or if this is a production issue at large, but it's definitely happening. And as it relates to the performance of the shoe, I don't notice it. In fact, I only noticed it when I cleaned these up and was getting it ready for what we're doing right here with this review. But it is there. The mesh underneath still seems to be fine. I don't notice any ripping or tearing or snagging, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And again, with about 150 plus-ish, but less than 200 on this shoe, this is a bit of a concern, I would say, from my standpoint. You could probably glue this back up, and it may be just fine, and you can move on about your day if you're really into this shoe. But it's definitely I think, durability issue that is going to have to be kept an eye on if this is going to be a long-term shoe, because at some point, if it doesn't outweigh how long you've had it, how many miles you're putting into it, and the type of conditions you're putting it under, obviously that sort of dollar per mile can start to flip if a shoe starts falling apart on you. As it relates to the upper, very much like the last version. So even though these are more breathable materials, the fit is roughly the same. And I say that with this being a middle of the road fit. It's not wide and it's not narrow. There's enough room up here for your toes to sort of move around. A lot more room here for your toes to splay. So it was never kind of a comfort issue from that standpoint. Very simplistic upper. Again, kind of showed you the falling apart here of these things, but very minimal in terms of what's here. Like just enough structure to keep the shoe kind of feeling from being too floppy, and for the most part, do a good job of locking your foot in place. For me, on this shoe specifically, I also notice a little bit in the heel that's looser. I don't feel like the heel has quite the lockdown as the previous, and just like all of my reviews, I always use the top eyelet because I've got a little bit of a narrow heel. So again, your mileage may vary, but overall, if you like the 2, the 3 is, I would say, pretty much a parallel move in terms of version to version. As we move around to the front, very much a strong or mostly strong toe cap here. Again, you've got some TPU overlays that add a little bit of structure to the toe box, keeps it up tall versus kind of sagging down on your foot. This is going to wrap around from the midsole and create kind of a good point here at the front. If they accidentally kick something or that type of thing, there's enough protection here. It's not bomb-proof, but there's definitely enough there that you can feel mostly confident, unless you're like really bad at stubbing your toes. This should kind of carry what you want. As it relates to the heel cup, it is fairly rigid, and you can see that when I kind of push down on it, it takes down this whole thing. There is some sort of plasticky type of cup in here that creates that structure, but this is well padded, it's soft, and there's kind of a nice amount of cushioning around the collar. And then as it relates to the tongue, this is, I guess, an anomaly anymore these days, which is having just a little bit of padding with some foam inside. So a lot of the shoes are starting to go towards very basic, very, very thin fabric. You still have a little bit here, so if you do need to crank those laces down farther, because it's slightly looser fit compared to previous versions, you can get a little bit more crank down on that front. And then from a gusseting, there really isn't any. There is a little bit of fabric kind of in here, really in this spot, and it's more for keeping the tongue in place because that gusseting doesn't exist down here. So, debris and those types of things could get in. That said, the tongue's thick enough. That wasn't something that I experienced during my timing with the shoe.
In closing, I think what you have here is just a good all-around shoe. It doesn't really specialize in anything. And if you're looking for a specialized shoe, you're going to be able to find options for more heavy-duty, heavier cushion, more protection shoes for the really rugged stuff. You're going to find more lightweight, spiky, grippy, built to go fast type of shoes as well. This fits kind of right in the middle of those two. And that's kind of where I have it for me. It's like if I'm going on a hybrid run and I kind of know I'm on groomed trail and some road and, you know, maybe a little bit of technical and some other stuff, this is a fine grab because it sort of does all that stuff really well without ever feeling like, ugh, wish I'd have picked up something else. I think that's what this is trying to do and works really well in that scenario. I think where this shoe kind of falls down for me is the more technical side, and some of it's that lack of protection. Doesn't have a rock plate, and it's a shorter stack, so you kind of feel those pokey things poke through. I think these lugs that are just kind of hanging out here, I said it in the Torrent 2 where they sort of shredded off. These ones haven't. So something looks like has been done to keep that from happening. So maybe that won't happen, but they're still, it's the same exact pattern, it's the same exact look. I feel like at some point, these are going to become loose and pop off and start, you know, kind of flopping around. I'm going to have to cut them off or they're just going to shred off on their own. And then the other part is sort of this, it's this, right? This, you've got this mud guard meeting this overlay on the top of the shoe. And both sides of the shoe, it's cracked and it's got a split. I think long term, potentially you're going to get weak points in here. Dirt's going to get in here. Sand is going to get in here. Something is going to happen. Right now, it's not like a pinch point in the traditional sense where you might have those two things and eventually they sort of cut each other off. These seem to be a fairly like clean break and a line. But again, it sort of created this bucket where stuff can fall in there and probably make it weaker. The good news is I've seen Hoka in the middle of a production do a update when something like that happened. So maybe we'll see that here. Or maybe it's just my shoe that I have here that is doing this. And that's actually a question for you. Do you have the Torrent 3? Is yours having this same issue with this mud guard and this overlay? Do you feel like the protection is good and sort of the lug patterning and updates that have been made on the bottom are keeping these things from shearing off? And of course, just what's your thoughts on the Torrent 3 in general? Leave those below this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.